Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, as an ex-IT guy, when I hear about users having the freedom to work from any device, on any network, in any location, at any time, I must admit it does give me flashbacks of all the bad stuff that can happen during my IT days and why IT are often misunderstood as business blockers instead of enablers when they just take their role as the guardians of the network incredibly seriously. But what if you could secure all those mobile devices without harming the user experience or upsetting employees by accessing too much personal information on their personal mobile phones? Well, today's guest is Denis O'Shea, who founded Mobile Mentor in New Zealand way back in 2004. And since then, the company has helped millions of people unlock the potential of their technology. And Mobile Mentor has become a global leader in the endpoint ecosystem, helping clients to navigate the right balance between security and employee experience. And since 2017, he's moved to Nashville, Tennessee to launch the company's US business with a focus on securing the mobile workforce in industries such as healthcare, education, finance, government service, and so much more. So with the scene set, buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Nashville, Tennessee, where Denis is waiting to speak with us. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Denis O'Shea. I'm the founder of a business called Mobile Mentor. And effectively, we help people to work remotely and get the balance right between their security and having a great experience.
I'd love to take you back before Mobile Mentor and find out a little bit more about how you got where you are today and ultimately your origin story. So where did your passion for tech come from? What lit that spark? And maybe tell the listeners a little bit more about the moment that put you on this path that you're on today.
Sure. So I grew up in Ireland. I graduated with an engineering degree and moved to Finland, which seemed like a great place to go back in the late 80s, and it was. And I worked for Nokia for many years, and I had a strong passion for technology. But interestingly, I've lost my passion, to be honest, Neil. I've lost that passion for technology itself. I'm now a lot more passionate about what technology can do for people and the outcomes it delivers for people. And I think I realized at some point along the way, I wasn't a great engineer. I was a good engineer, but I was never going to be a great engineer. So I kind of pivoted my career and got more into focused on what can customers, what can organizations do with the technology we're developing, rather than going deeper into the technology itself.
Well, it's so refreshing to hear that because I think all too often we hear about technology first solution and then look for the problem to solve. But looking at solving the problem first and then the technology, that's where the sweet spot happens. And you mentioned obviously you started in Ireland, then Finland. Now you're in Nashville and that path led you to Mobile Mentor. So can you set the scene and tell me a little bit more about the problems that solves and what makes it different from other services that people might be aware of out there?
Sure. There's a bit in between. There's probably an important part of the story, which is I worked for Nokia and I was helping them sell advanced cellular networks back in the 2000s, building what was at the time 3G networks. And one of my customers hit me with a really tough question one day, which was a career-defining moment. I was living in Switzerland, working for Nokia over there, trying to sell some technology to Orange, the big cellular operator. And the CEO said to me, why should we buy this technology you're trying to sell us when we haven't got value from the stuff we bought off you last year? And I couldn't answer it. And I lost the sale. And it really, really bothered me. And I spent a lot of time thinking about how do we actually get people to adopt and use the technology we're selling? Not just sell it for the sake of getting a sale, but truly adopt it. And then I watched what was happening in the industry. And we could see that companies like Nokia were bringing out these amazing smartphones and building cellular networks. And people weren't using them. Most people were sending text messages and they were making voice calls. They weren't doing any of the fancy stuff that these cellular networks were capable of. And so I got to a point of frustration where I decided to leave Nokia and set up Mobile Mentor. And my goal back then was very narrow, very, very singular. It was, I wanted to try and help people set up their first smartphone. because I don't know if you can remember what it was like back in 2004. Setting up a smartphone was a pain in the butt. You needed to know a server, 2 different server addresses. You needed this funky cable to plug into your phone or into your laptop. You're trying to get your email working, your calendar syncing, all your contacts set up, putting the plus in front of all your numbers. All that stuff was very messy. And I had this idea, which came to me through a customer who said, I just need someone to sit down with me for an hour. I've tried myself. I read the manual. I called Vodafone. It's too hard. I just need someone to sit down with me and help me set it up. And so for me, that was the genesis of my career transition from working for a corporate to building my own company. And I set up Mobile Mentor to do that one thing. So I hired smart young people who would go out and sit with someone like yourself if you had just bought your first BlackBerry or your first Nokia smartphone, and spend an hour with you and get everything working, and then move on to the next person and the next person. But it was one person at a time. How do we make you, Neil, super productive with your smartphone so you can do all your emails and contacts and your web browsing and everything just works? And we did that for one person, proved that then 10,000 and then eventually 1 million people around the world.
Wow, that's incredible. And I had a few flashbacks listening to your story there, because I was an IT guy back in those BlackBerry days, and nothing frightened the life out of me more than somebody walking towards me, usually a CEO or something, with that BlackBerry in their hand saying, can you transfer everything from BlackBerry A to BlackBerry B? And I'm like, oh no, here we go.
Yeah. And actually, BlackBerry, as you'll recall, had the story pretty well sorted. They were good. They had it nice and tight, especially around email. The other devices, Motorola's and Ericsson's and Nokia's and others, they were a lot more problematic. They were very, very challenging. So that's really where the market opportunity was, helping organizations make these devices work at scale and be secure and give people a good experience.
And it also allows IT teams to focus on adding value back to the business rather than focusing on those time-consuming tasks. And of course, the world has changed so much since those BlackBerry days. And even in the last 2 years, there's been so much around the hybrid workforce that's now emerging. And one of the reasons that put you guys on my platform, and I think you did a bit of research on understanding that workforce, specifically remote workers coming out of the pandemic. Are you able to share any insights from that?
Yeah, I can, of course. The smartphone that people were using like 15 years ago as their primary productive device has now changed, and now it's a smartphone and probably a tablet and a laptop. So the mobile devices that we're all working with today are, those 3 devices. And in some cases, we even saw people grab their desktop and a couple of monitors from the office and take them home at the start of the pandemic. So in a way, all our devices became mobile devices to serve the needs of people working remotely. And I guess what we've seen is that need that we saw in 2004, people need help to make all this work well and get the right balance between security and their experience. It's exactly the same today, but it's just a bit more nuanced because people are using applications like Microsoft, the Microsoft 365 applications on their smartphone, their tablet, their desktop, their laptop. It all has to work in the home office. And then the days they go into the office with their laptop, or maybe days they're doing other things, it's got to work everywhere they are. So it's more nuanced, it's more complex today, but the challenge is the same as it was 15 or 20 years ago.
It is. And of course, now we've got organizations with 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 employees, possibly even more, that those devices must work, whether they're remote or hybrid working. So can you tell me a little bit more about why it's more important than ever to secure those hundreds, if not thousands of mobile devices that are relied on every day too?
Well, 5 things happened in the last couple of years, which really changed this landscape. First, there was this global chip shortage early in the pandemic, which meant that companies just could not supply enough laptops to their employees. So they had to give explicit permission to their workforce to use their own devices. So BYOD, bring your own device, was treated well by some companies, but kind of ignored by most. They swept it under the rug. It was a bit inconvenient. But then during the pandemic, people had to be very deliberate and intentional and say, we need you to use your personal device because we can't get supply of laptops to give you. So that was a big change and really formally embracing BYOD. And then we saw about a 500% increase in cybercrime through the pandemic, which was tragic. And the way the cyber criminals went after healthcare, schools, cities, municipal governments, and all that, quite amazing to see how targeted they were. And everyone was coming under attack. So that really increased the need to secure all these devices, in particular, devices that were in remote locations in people's homes. And then we saw, as we started to come out of the pandemic, we saw people hiring lots of new staff, some of them remotely, and onboarding those staff remotely. So now you're onboarding people you've never met, working in a home office you've never seen, using a device you don't own, and setting them up with your company applications and data. You know, it's an amazing situation that companies are in now compared to where they used to be, where they would have a walled garden and say, here's the company machine, and it's all locked down, and it's got all our policies, and you use it in the office. And now we're saying, use your personal devices in your home office on a consumer-grade Wi-Fi device that you probably bought from, some shop down the road. And you're sharing the same internet connection with the TikTok generation and the YouTube generation and the Fortnite generation. And you're doing business in that environment. And then we're being attacked by cybercrime. Yeah. So the temperature went up over the last 2 years, the intensity and I guess the importance of getting the security right. But then also we saw the Great Resignation happen. And so companies who weren't taking best care of their employees lost them. And then people are struggling to get talent, and employees are looking at companies and making judgment calls about the way they might be treated by these companies. And so the importance of getting the experience right also became a lot more important. So you got to get the security right in someone's home office, and you got to get the experience right to attract them to work for you in the first place, and then keep them around. This area just got so much more nuanced and complex.
And I'm glad you said the word complex there. I was just about to say it is such a complex issue because on one hand, businesses are happier that people are using their own devices because it can save them a hell of a lot of money if they've got to buy, 2,000 Android phones or what have you. And on top of that, some employees are much happier that they're not having to carry around 2 devices everywhere they go, so they're happier. But on the flip side, some like to keep their work life and personal life completely separate, and they're a bit funny about having security added to their smartphones when it's their own personal device. It's such a complex issue. So, I suppose my question is, how can businesses better secure remote workers using their personal devices, and finding that balance, getting that balance right? Is there anything you can share around that?
Yeah, there is. I can share some scars. I can tell you how we've got it wrong, and we've got it wrong together with some of our clients over the last 10 or 12 years. Because, for a long time, organizations tried to secure the devices owned by their employees. And they put some management software on them called mobile device management, MDM. And in many cases, the employees pushed back and said, no, you're not managing my personal device. I don't want you tracking my location and being able to see what apps I have, or, I don't want you having any management control of my device. Mm-hmm. And that was very understandable. Fortunately, the technology has advanced, and now it's possible to manage the applications without managing the device. So, for example, if you need your employees to use Outlook and Teams and Excel and Word and applications like that, you can wrap a security policy around the application and protect the data that's in that application without managing the person's device. Mm-hmm. And that's a really important distinction. And so when we're now helping customers and organizations with this whole BYOD concept, we generally try and help them first figure out what's the policy that they want to follow and how do they want to articulate this to their employees. Because if you get that wrong, it all falls apart. If you get it right, it's quite empowering. And so, for example, if we can say to employees, we're not going to manage your device. We can't see your location. We can't see your messages. We can't see what social apps you've got. We can't see what you're browsing. But we absolutely, unconditionally, have to manage our company data and our company apps. Mm. And once people understand that and then see that you respect their privacy and you're protecting client information or patient information or student information, they're generally okay with that when it's explained well.
Yeah, I think it's that communication piece that's so important. Would you say you've got that balance right now between security and employee experience?
Sometimes. It depends. It depends on the industry. It depends how much regulation is in the industry, and it depends on the client's strategy. We still have some clients who want to go over the top on security, And then what we see is their employees work around their security policies. We did a big study at the end of 2021, and we found almost half of employees find their security policies to be restrictive. And I think 48% have already found ways to get around their security policies. Mm. And then something like 60% said they prefer working with apps like Gmail and Dropbox to their company's applications. Mm. So that means, those employers in a way have failed to provide the right tools in the right way to empower their employees. So their employees are working around those policies, which is tragic because now there's a routine of company information in Gmail, in Gmail emails and on G Drive somewhere or Dropbox. So that's a real problem. And then we see other organizations who have erred the other way. They've probably deployed lots of applications, lots of cloud applications and the Microsoft Office 365 applications to their employees with very little security. They don't have multi-factor authentication. People are using personal devices. They're managing their passwords badly. They're taking all sorts of risks and they don't realize it. So It's possible to get the balance right, but it requires work and a very intentional effort.
And something else I wanted to bring up, because we started this podcast back in 2015, and one of the first guests on here was the team at Fido, and talking of going passwordless. Of course, here we are over 7 years later, we're still not passwordless. But do you think we will eventually all go passwordless? We need to. And realistically, how far away are we from getting there, especially with the introduction of biometrics now and two-factor authentication apps, etc.? Do you think we're getting closer?
You touch on a subject that's dear to my heart because we see passwordless authentication as one of the great ways to balance security and employee experience. Mm. It's more secure because you're dealing with fewer passwords. And what people don't understand is every time you type a password, you take a risk. Yeah. Back in the old days, every time you crossed the road, you took a risk. But now you type a password because you don't know if there's any other software sniffing or monitoring your keystrokes and what you're doing. So the more we can go passwordless, the more secure we are and the better the experience for the employee. And we're actually closer to getting there than many people would realize. Like if you think about your experience using an iPhone or an Android device, you look at it, it scans your face, it logs you into the operating system. Then you've probably got single sign-on to all the applications you use. So you're largely passwordless with your smartphone or Android device on a daily basis. Same with the tablet. If you're using a Windows computer that has Windows Hello facial recognition, it scans your face, logs you in. So I don't think I've typed a password for about a year. And frankly, I don't miss it because it's a pain. So the technology is there. Organizations are not. So again, it comes down to the tech is slightly ahead of people. Mm. That's the challenge we've got. The tech is ahead of people. And FIDO is a great solution. Everybody needs to start using biometrics in some way and start using single sign-on solutions. So the technology and using multi-factor authentication, those are the three things, really. Using biometrics and buying devices, being very deliberate and saying, we only want to buy laptops that have an encryption chip that allow us to do facial recognition. And then buying applications that have single sign-on capability and using multi-factor authentication across all our applications. Those three together will enable us to get to passwordless very, very quickly.
And just going back to something you said at the very beginning of our conversation, you set the scene and said that many businesses have recruited and onboarded new staff without even ever having met them face to face. So from a leadership point of view, how do you lead people you've never met and how do you keep them engaged? What experiences have you had around this over the last few years?
Well, it's interesting. We used to have all our staff based on offices in Auckland, New Zealand, Wellington, New Zealand, Sydney, Australia, and Nashville, Tennessee. That's kind of our footprint. And everybody was based in the office and did their thing in the office. Now we've got everybody working remotely, and a few people go into the office 2 or 3 days a week, but it's optional, and most of the work gets done remotely. So we're hiring. We've almost doubled our headcount since the start of the pandemic because there's a lot of demand for working securely, and we're hiring people remotely. Some of them we still have not met. Every now and again, we try and bring people together for some social gathering or team building activity. But the majority of what we're doing is remote. And so what we figured out is we need to be very intentional and build our onboarding processes for remote workers first. Assume they're not going to be in the office. Part of that is I spend time with them on day one. As the founder, it's really important that I tell them the founding story, why we're in business, and what's our strategy at a high level. And then our CEO follows up on that. I think it's around day 30, giving the new employees a really good understanding of these are the things we're doing. These are the things we're measuring. Here are our dashboards. Here's what matters around here. Here's how we make decisions on complex issues. And then every remote employee has a buddy or a mentor, somebody to help them navigate through what they're doing. And I guess the bit I've missed is all our training has been digitized. It's all videos. Mm-hmm. And they're not polished production, high value productions, but they're videos where we provide a training to somebody, we recorded it on Teams or Zoom, whatever, and that becomes an artifact we can use over and over again. So we've just leaned into video in a really big way and writing documents that show how we do things in a scalable way. And now it really doesn't matter whether someone's in Bonnaroo in Tennessee or Timbuktu in North Africa, as long as they've got a good internet connection and they're engaged, the location just doesn't matter anymore.
There's so many things that stood out for me about your story when I was researching you before you came on the podcast. I know we'll have businesses listening all over the world, and many leaders will still be dreaming of going paperless in their office. They've been promising it for years, but they've still not quite achieved it, and people still feel better going and printing things out. But for you guys, you've gone paperless, serverless, and passwordless. So I've got to ask, what is the secret to running a paperless, serverless, passwordless business? Because you guys seem just streets ahead of most businesses out there.
Look, I suspect many have caught up with us over the last 2 years because the pandemic really has been a great accelerator. Sadly, we still have clients who need someone to go into an office, retrieve a fax. Yes, a fax. And then figure out who it's for and take a photograph of it and send it out to the right person. So healthcare, education, some industries are still very heavy on paper. We're a digital organization, so we just don't need it. So we just ban printers. Yeah. When our printers, we came to the end of their lease, we just said, we're done. There's no need for any paper in this business. And I'm very passionate about that. And I challenge all my customers to go paperless. And we have some great ding-dong arguments about the need to keep printers and scanners and faxes. And, we have healthcare clients who consume a pallet of paper per building per day. A pallet.
Wow.
And so I love challenging them on that. It's great fun. Serverless is, that's a bigger journey. That means committing to the cloud, whether it's the Microsoft cloud or Amazon cloud or whatever, committing all your services to the cloud and getting rid of that on-premise data center or the cupboard in the corner or the little server room with all stuff in it. We've got down to the point where I think we only have a router in our offices now. I think it's just a router and a switch. That's it. Really, really simple. And no telephones. Everything is just the mobile phone. So we think the PBX hopefully has died for most organizations over the last couple of years, or should be in its final throes. And then, passwordless we've talked about, but the alarming thing, Neil, about passwords is the research we did shows that the passwords themselves are not so much the problem. It's how people are managing them. And what we found is that 31% of people write their work passwords in a personal journal.
Yeah.
And 24% write their work passwords on a notes application on their personal smartphone.
Yeah.
It's crazy what people are doing with their passwords because they have too many, right? People just have this enormous volume of passwords. And we're not databases. We can't remember long, complex passwords with alphanumeric characters and exclamation marks and all that. We just can't do it. So we tend to find easy patterns, and people are still using their pets' names and variations of their pets' names for their passwords. So, as an organization, if you have a strategy to go passwordless, my encouragement is hurry up and get there. If you have impediments, my encouragement is get a password management tool. You can get them for as cheap as a couple of bucks, and all your passwords go in there. And there's one super strong password that kind of, is your access to the vault, and inside the vault are your other 50 or 100 passwords. That's way better than a personal journal or notes on your phone.
Or even worse, using the exact same password for every single website that you go on. There's a few people like that out there as well, isn't there?
Yeah, well, the BBC did a great study last year. They found that 6% of people in Britain use the word password as their password, and 15% use their pet's name. They admitted that.
Yeah, that's insane.
It's phenomenal. Yeah.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today, but we started the podcast talking about your origin story. I'm now going to ask if we, as we come full circle, to leave the listeners on an inspirational note and ask you to share a story about a song, a piece of music, movie, book, or anything that has inspired you or helped you in your career. Is there anything you can leave us with today?
Oh, look, I would say for me, it was more a location and a genre of music that inspired me. So I came to Nashville on a vacation, on a holiday with my family about 7 or 8 years ago. And I knew Nashville was a big music town. I didn't realize how big it was. And we came here and we kind of got infected by it. It just got under our skin in a way that we all loved it. And my kids were like, hey, Dad, can we move to Nashville? And we did eventually. It took another couple of holidays. And a few years later, we moved here. The music was really one of the big inspiration factors. Now, it's a huge healthcare town. And from a business perspective, that's what drew me. But the music inspired me. And I've never been musical, but I took up guitar since moving here. And now I try and play an hour every day and play with some guys in the neighborhood. We've got a little band going. I never thought in my life I would be living in Nashville, Tennessee, playing music, playing with other people, inspired by the industry and going to songwriters events and all that. It's rewired my brain in a way I would never have expected and given me a whole new lifelong learning curve to tackle. So for me, it's been a wonderful inspiration.
Absolutely brilliant. Love that. And before I let you go, for anyone listening wanting to find out more information about any of the topics we talked about today, contact your team at Mobile Mentor or even find out more about the research you did there as well. What's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, the best starting point for the research is a website called the endpointecosystem.com. So endpoint, all one word, endpointecosystem.com. And we've shared the research freely with the world because there's so much to learn on it. It's much bigger than us or anything we can do to address it. So it's freely available. You can download the research report. It's really fascinating. And then if you want to find out more about what we can do to help organizations get that balance right between their security and the employee experience, come to mobile-mentor.com, mobile-mentor.com. And ask for me by name, Denis, and I'll make sure that any of your clients get treated like royalty and take good care of them.
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much. And love chatting with you today about how to secure remote workers using their personal devices, getting that balance right between security and employee experiences, leading people you've never met, and running a paperless, serverless, passwordless business. I suspect there'll be a few people wanting to contact you about that, but more than anything, just thank you for sharing your story.
Well, thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much to Denis for coming on here, talking about how we can secure remote workers using their personal devices and balance security with employee experience. And fair play to them there for completely mastering how to run a paperless, serverless, passwordless business. In fact, I'd like to throw that one out to everyone listening. How many people can say that they work for a paperless, serverless, passwordless business? I suspect there's not many, but if there are any others out there, please, I want to hear about you. I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. And remember, if you leave a rating or review of the podcast, take a screenshot, send it over to me at techblogwriter@outlook.com, and I'll give you a shout out there too. But other than that, reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. But don't just hit the connect button or follow. Send me a quick DM as well. Let me know you listen. If you'd like to work with me, look me up at techblogwriter.co.uk. But I'm going to conserve my energy now. We're racing towards 2,000 interviews and 2 million downloads. I hope you'll stick with me every step of the way this year as we hit those milestones. But a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.